Hi there, and welcome to the Cotswold Explorer. I'm Robin Shuckburgh, and I'm here to tell you a little bit about Downton Abbey. A few days ago, the people of Bampton, the film set for the village of Downton, and my home village, were invited to a special viewing of the new Downton Abbey film, the grand finale. I can't say the local reviews have been unanimously enthusiastic, but what is unanimous is the clear affection the villagers have for their distinguished cinematic visitors. It's been almost exactly 15 years since the first TV series was broadcast in the UK, and on the whole, we have nothing but fond memories of the crews, the actors, and the resulting visitors from all over the world who come here still to worship at the altar of the Grantham family. The Cotswold Explorer, by dint of my having worked closely with some of the Downton people on projects of various kinds in Bampton, has made lots of films with the Downton connection over the years, and this is a compilation of all those bits and pieces, which I hope will demonstrate our own feelings of affection for all things Downton. We have hugely enjoyed going back over the years and reliving the whole experience.
We're starting here at Cogges Farm, an extraordinary place just outside Witney. It's a farm museum, really. It's beautiful. Behind me you see this wonderful medieval farmhouse. We're going to show you around. Come with me. Cogges Farm is just on the outskirts of the town of Witney, a few miles from my home. I've known it as a place to visit with my children as long as I like to remember, but these days it's showing all the signs of optimism and excitement that you expect when great management and enthusiastic workers and volunteers coincide. It's a medieval farm museum. You'll find animals from ponies and goats to ducks, not to mention a wandering cat. Wonderful soaring barns with spectacular oak-beamed roofs, and a medieval farmhouse with an astonishing history laid out as if almost undisturbed for several hundred years. Towards the end of the third TV series, the locations people for Downton Abbey were warned by Julian Fellows that they would need an ancient farm in which to film for Series 4. Sparky Ellis, the locations manager for the series, happened to be in the butcher's in Bampton when he heard the news, and asked Ollie the butcher if he knew of anywhere locally. Cogges Farm was the obvious and immediate answer. If you visit this wonderful place, you can hear Sparky relate this tale in the sitting room of the farmhouse on what looks like one of the earliest televisions ever made. He will tell you that Cogs was an extremely rare, perfect location, which met all their needs without the usual changes and adaptations that the set designers have to cope with. Cogs was turned into Yew Tree Farm for Downton Abbey. Filmed in the manor house kitchen as well as the grounds, Yew Tree Farm is home to the Drew family in Series 4 and 5, where Lady Edith's child is brought up, and later home to Mr. Mason in Series 6. Dame Maggie Smith and characters Tom Branson, Lady Edith and Lady Mary all appeared here in various episodes. It's obvious from the moment you arrive at Cogs that it's extremely special. It's been a museum now for over 40 years, and ironically, perhaps it's that which makes it feel so incredibly authentic. We will be visiting 3 different kinds of film set during this episode from the Cotswold Explorer. 1, the villages where as soon as the film crews leave, the village does its best to revert to normal life. 2, a village owned by the National Trust that feels almost as though it was built as a film set. And then Cogs, where you really feel as if you're going back into the Middle Ages to get a glimpse of what life was like at that time. Cogs sits on the River Windrush, and a Saxon settlement grew up here from 500 AD. The manor is listed in the Domesday Book, and a house was built here in the 1100s. Ownership of the place changed often, but in the 1550s, Henry VIII gave the manor to Sir Thomas Pope, the founder of Trinity College, Oxford. It was he and his family who seem to have built the farmhouse you see today, incorporating outbuildings already existing into the courtyard layout. You can find a marble effigy of Sir Thomas in Trinity College Chapel, in full medieval armour. The museum has a great cafe, an interesting shop, and although we don't spend a lot of time recommending businesses on this channel, I really do suggest you come to this place, and bring any stray children you can lay your hands on. They'll love it. If you do, the whole story of the filming of Downton here will be related to you as you go round the house. We're now going back to Bampton. Now I know we've been there many times, but we have a very special guest. Come with me. Heading the few miles to Bampton to meet our special guest, we'll drop in on a couple of the smaller locations used in the series. Firstly, a couple of miles up the road towards Burford is the little hamlet of Swynbrook. The romance between Lady Sybil and Branson, her chauffeur, was quite the scandal in Downton, so their meetings needed to be in a remote place for their relationship to stay secret. It was here, in the Swan pub in Series 2, that they planned their elopement amidst much drama. The village pub in real life is owned by the Devonshire family from Chatsworth in Derbyshire, and the long history of the village's relationship with the Mitford sisters is related in the letters and photographs on the walls. In the village church are some of the most renowned church monuments in the area, a tomb of the Fettyplace family, stacked one above one another to save space in this tiny church, portrayed lying on one side, resting their heads on their hands, in various styles of dress according to their period. It's a remarkable sight, and well worth a visit. We then head south, cross the A40 near Burford, heading towards Carterton, where we need to drive slowly so as not to miss the turning to the village of Shilton. The road takes you down into the valley on your right, over a ford, often a good foot or more deep, and into an extremely peaceful and pretty village. The real pub here, called the Rose and Crown, is great and will provide you with wonderful refreshment and hospitality, but perhaps a little strangely for them, in Downton, the building called the Old Forge, about 200 yards away, just next to the ford, was transformed by the brilliant set designers into a fictional pub. You can see why it was they chose this lovely place to film, but also why this village works hard to settle back down to normal life once they're gone. From here, it's just half a dozen miles to Bampton, the location of the village of Downton. The Crawley's house, the church in which the funerals and marriages, both successful and otherwise, took place, and, of course, the cottage hospital. So here we are in my hometown of Bampton. We've been here before, of course, and if you want to see a lot more about this extraordinary village, there are several films on our channel for you to look at. But it's an extremely opportune moment because we are about to open the newly restored old grammar school. It's a project that's been on the boil for a very long time. In fact, before Downton Abbey was even a glimmer in the eye of Julian Fellows. I'm going to leave it to someone much grander than I am to tell you a little bit about the story. Here's Lord Grantham.
This is the Downton Cottage Hospital, where Lady Sybil helped Dr. Clarkson treat recuperating soldiers during the First World War, and where Mrs. Hughes came when she feared she might be seriously ill. The hospital in real life is the old grammar school at Bampton in Oxfordshire, one of the main locations for the series.
Hello there, I'm Hugh Bonneville, and that was me more than 7 years ago, walking around the wonderful but slightly dilapidated 17th century grammar school in Bampton. Since then, the people of Bampton, with the help of the local councils, an assortment of benefactors, and the support of tens of thousands of Downton Abbey fans, have achieved amazing things. First, the roof needed to be completely overhauled. For the first time in over 100 years, each Cotswold stone tile was carefully removed, meticulously trimmed, and then reused. Only where absolutely necessary were new tiles of a similar age, sourced from elsewhere. Now the roof is good for another 100 years. In the 1960s, the top floor of this building was isolated for reasons of safety, and the staircase removed. So the next great step was to reinstate the stairs and to restore the top floor, whilst taking the opportunity to bring the ground floor up to scratch as well. This would be expensive. So the team at the Bampton Community Archive, with the help of the landlords, the Bampton Exhibition Foundation, set about raising the huge amount of money needed.
Well, this project has been very exciting, but I have to admit, it's something of a long and winding road. We started before Downton Abbey was even thought of, and we've raised and spent just shy of £400,000. It's a mind-boggling sum, and I can't tell you how proud I am of my neighbours and friends who've supported the effort. We raised around half that sum through grants, and the rest through great fundraising ideas and good old-fashioned commerce.
Downton Abbey fans played no small part in this effort. When I visited the village for the BBC a few years later, I saw for myself the amazing number of people from all parts of the world who had been coming to Bampton. A map on the wall with pins stuck into it by visitors to show where they came from clearly demonstrated the worldwide attraction of the series. Among the many fundraising initiatives was one called the Downton Mile. 71,527 £1 coins laid end to end reach a mile. An incredible 38,135 coins have been donated to this mile so far, the majority by Downton visitors. The newly restored building will be used as a community hub in Bampton. The village library, situated on the ground floor for decades now, has a brand new layout, bringing the village a modern facility to meet its needs. The ground floor shop will provide local craft and art for visitors from around the world, and the upper floor will provide an incredible space for talks, exhibitions, courses, film shows, any activity that has an educational purpose.
So there we are. We're moving on now from my wonderful hometown of Bampton, and we're going to visit a village that in some ways took over from Bampton in the filming of Downton Abbey. We're heading for the glorious National Trust village of Lacock. Come with me. We're headed south, further south indeed than the Cotswold explorer has ever ventured, to visit what is perhaps the most photographed village in the whole of the south of England. It's been in a great many films and television programmes, including Downton Abbey, and its classic stone-built Cotswold cottages, barns and spectacular abbey, long since converted into a private home by the Fox-Talbot family, are imprinted onto the camera chips of millions of people from all over the world. In fact, in an appropriate twist of fate, it is the birthplace of the whole photographic industry. The negative imaging printing process was invented here. It's the village of Lacock in Wiltshire. Several years ago, when the first Downton movie was being planned, Sparky Ellis, the locations manager I mentioned earlier, came to Bampton one day and apologised to me for the fact that our village was not to be featured for more than a few seconds in the film. They had chosen to use Lacock for all the dramatic village scenes. He admitted that there had been some talk that Bampton wouldn't be required at all, but that he had persuaded the powers that be that at least the church should feature, and perhaps it would be unfair to leave us out altogether. Lacock had been ruled out of the earlier TV series because when Downton was in development, the team had just finished filming Gosford Park. They had exhausted almost all the suitable locations near London, including Lacock, and the discovery of Bampton for the Downton Village location was a huge relief to them. But by the time the Downton movie came along, the memory of Gosford Park had faded, and Lacock once more looked a highly attractive location prospect. It belongs to the National Trust, making it much more simple to negotiate the arrival of a film crew, and the villagers are so used to the process that it comes as second nature to them. There is also extremely little in the way of expensive disguising of the 20th century that has to be done. All in all, it's a perfect film set. And so, Ross and I discovered something rather strange in Lacock. We came away from here wondering why we hadn't enjoyed our visit nearly as much as we had expected to. It hadn't felt right somehow. Now I know we're spoiled rotten. We spend our time wandering the fabulously beautiful hills of the Cotswolds, searching out the most unspoiled and peaceful places to show you all. And I know that on the face of it, Lacock is a perfectly preserved example of exactly what we're looking for. But there, I think, lies its problem. It's all a little too perfect. It actually feels like a film set. As you walk the streets, you expect any minute to see someone wandering around in period costume, or to hear the clatter of horse and carriage. It doesn't feel real. In fact, it isn't. If you've got this far in this film, you will have seen already that I am genuinely grateful for the way in which the devotees of Downton Abbey have helped me and my team to restore the 17th century old grammar school in Bampton. I can honestly say that in all the years they've been coming, I haven't met with anything but courtesy, enthusiasm, generosity and kindness from any of them, from wherever in the world they come.
In 2008, Donald Woods, a leading film designer, had just finished a series for the BBC called Cranford. To find the location for this series, he and his staff had scoured the countryside of southwest England, looking for the perfect village, eventually ending up in Lacock. Now, a new costume series was planned for ITV, written by Julian Fellows, called Downton Abbey. It was to be set in Yorkshire, and the main house had already been chosen as Highclere Castle. Donald knew that he'd visited almost all the potential locations in the region and was bemoaning the fact that it would be extremely difficult to find another village that would meet his criteria. He needed somewhere that was built of stone, matching as closely as possible that of Yorkshire, and which would also look as though it could convincingly be the village built up around the castle. Perhaps his most challenging requirement was a village that would not need him to close down any businesses whilst filming. All film companies are extremely sensitive to the fact that disruption during filming must be kept to a minimum. He needed a place that had two distinct centres, one of which was unencumbered by shops and had a church sufficiently grand for his purposes. Like many people over the centuries, he'd never found Bampton. It's not an accident that it used to be called Bampton in the Bush, but the person to whom he was speaking was the country's most distinguished television film producer, Dame Pippa Harris, who happened to live here. She suggested he might like to have a look at Bampton. Within a week he was here with his team, and it looked as though he'd found the perfect place. The church close was quiet, pretty much untouched for centuries, easy to close off from traffic, separate from the commercial centre of the village, and all within an hour and a half of Highclere and London. On a more practical note, it also had an enormous parking space at the recreation ground where the fleet of lorries, canteens and buses that always come with a film crew could base themselves, and an enthusiastic parish council who would work with him to facilitate their needs. Television costume drama at the time was on the wane. No one expected Downton to be more than one series long, but they were delighted to have found their location and set about the planning and then in 2009 the filming of Series 1 with enjoyment. Little did they, or indeed Pippa Harris, know that this was to become the biggest television phenomenon of all time. So behind me is the Church of St Mary's in Bampton.
This wonderful church, sitting in the middle of its medieval minster enclosure, is one of the joys of our village. In the 1st century AD, there was an Anglo-Saxon religious community here, and it's probable that there was a church on the site well before the Norman invasion. But the magnificent church we see today was largely built in the 12th and 13th centuries. It was the scene of all the funerals and weddings, both successful and otherwise, in Downton, and was the only building in Bampton filmed on the inside. The graveyard has been the source of the greatest confusion for the fans of Downton, where many visitors have been found searching for the gravestone of Matthew Crawley. The set builders tell us that it also created the biggest continuity problem. Having killed off many characters in the war and the flu epidemic, there were 11 gravestones and memorials they had to get in exactly the same place for each series. When setting up Sybil's tomb for a shoot towards the end of the series, they heard an American visitor say to her husband, "I told you she was buried here," only for her to be dumbfounded when 2 burly set builders picked it up and moved it 2 feet to the left. Churchgate House was the home of the Crawley family throughout the series, and whilst all the filming of the house was from the outside, the house itself was used as a green room for the stars. There's many a tale of jollity and fun, including some very exciting antics in the swimming pool, about which the village is sworn to secrecy. The owner of the house was surprised last summer to find a stranger walking around in her garden, and when she approached the visitor, she was amazed to be asked if she'd bought the house from the Crawley family. There is a serious blurring of reality and fiction around this series that has touched so deeply the lives of so many. The old grammar school found fame as the Downton Cottage Hospital. This lovely 17th century building was gifted to the village as a free school by one Robert Vasey, a local landowner whose reputation has taken a bit of a beating recently. Research into his life by the Oxford academic Professor Peter McCulloch suggests he wasn't quite the good-natured wool merchant we'd always thought him to be, but we don't hold it against him. We've raised a great deal of money over the last few years for the restoration of this building, in a campaign supported by Hugh Bonneville, who made a short film for us to introduce the project.
This is the Downton Cottage Hospital, where Lady Sybil helped Dr. Clarkson treat recuperating soldiers during the First World War, and where Mrs. Hughes came when she feared she might be seriously ill.
Thanks to the tireless work of our huge team of volunteers, we've successfully restored the roof of the building, and we're doing well towards raising the huge sums needed for the replacement of the staircase and the reopening of the top floor. Once finished, there'll be a permanent exhibition of the filming of Downton in Bampton, along with other exhibitions and events. With the help and generosity of the many visitors from all over the world who've come here to visit Bampton, and those who will come in the future, we're confident of success. The other small buildings vital to the plot are the 2 pubs and the post office, transformed into their new roles by the addition of a few props, signs and seats for the pubs, and posters and a pillar box for the post office. Just recently, Hugh Bonneville revisited Bampton with BBC Radio to record a documentary on the locations of Downton, and we had an interesting conversation.
Just to set the scene where we are, we're outside the church, which obviously I visited quite frequently when we were filming here.
It was rather wonderful when you were here because the place was empty of cars. It's life goes on in the village like this, and it's a busy place. But of course nowadays we have a lot of visitors as well as a result of your being here.
So we're now heading out of the church through the church gate, and we've got Churchgate House on the right. Up ahead of us is the old school. This building, of course, featured as the cottage hospital in the show.
It was built in 17th century by a man called Robert Vasey, who we always used to think was a rather wonderful wool merchant and generous man, but recent research has made us discover that he was actually something of a rogue.
Oh.
He was a moneylender. But we don't mind. He gave us his money and he built this lovely building.
We're standing outside it now, and it says, Bampton Library on one side and Bampton Archive and Vesey Room. So it has a dual function at the moment.
It does, and will continue to do so. It is where our library is based. The village library is thriving and extremely valuable to the village. That will always remain here. But also it'll have, for a while anyway, a permanent exhibition of the filming of Downton Abbey in Bampton, which draws people from all over the world. And so we will give them a much increased
best tourism offering once it's finished.
Leads us nicely on to talking about the impact of filming, not just Downton, but other projects that may or may not have been filmed here over the years.
Yeah.
Obviously, it can bring in tourism, which can be a good thing. The bus gets stuck, people can't park, can't get to their houses. There must be a downside to the upside.
On the whole, the people of Bampton have really enjoyed the Downton experience. It continues, and the tourist numbers grow. Even now, they're growing, even though the series finished quite a long time ago. The projections are that we will go on having, tens of thousands of visitors every year.
Tens of thousands?
Yes, we had certainly 27,000, I think it was, that came through this shop last year.
Good Lord.
So it's become, Downton is one of the most extraordinary phenomena in this business ever, and it's worldwide. There's a map here, which obviously these are buttons for people who visited the shop.
We're looking, yes,
the
there's a map of the world with little pins, and people, presumably when they visit, they can stick in which country they're from.
Wherever they're from.
So we're looking at, there's quite a lot in Southeast Australia, a lot from New Zealand, a lot from Perth, a lot from, interestingly, really quite a lot from China, India, South Africa.
And those were mostly during the course of the latter half of last year. And of course, there's a huge American contingent, but also South American.
Yeah.
And this year, it's only just started, but as you can see,
Is this a new map?
This is brand new map for this.
Oh,
this
so
year.
that
This
was
last year.
God, that was all 1 year.
All in 1 year.
Gosh, so a huge amount from America, a lot from Europe, a lot from the Far East, and a huge amount from, as I say, Southeast Australia. So this year already, you've got, the United States is populating quite nicely. You've got some from Brazil there, from Australia, Taiwan, Japan. Oh, well.
It does, of course, have its drawbacks. The coaches are one thing, and that is down to us to find a solution to that problem. They'll come in. We have to accept the fact that it's happening, and that is something that this village is constantly talking about. But also facilities. Not to put too fine a point on it, when people arrive in that sort of numbers, you need loos and you need all kinds of things. These are not things that this village was prepared for. It was known as Bampton in the bush, and for a good reason, because it's almost impossible to get to. And hardly everybody came here, nobody came here. But now it has become clear that we're going to have to do something about that. So you could say that's a downside. But I'm not sure that that's necessarily right. I think, in fact, what is happening to Bampton is, in the long run, going to turn out to be extremely beneficial.
Well, I suppose so, yes, in the longer term, because when we filmed here, we parked up at the sports field, didn't we, just outside town, and then got bussed in either cars or small minibuses. So I think the problems of having 49 seaters clogging up the lanes, wasn't something we'd quite anticipated either.
I have to say that we all have a sort of proprietorial feeling about Downton Abbey, and indeed about the cast. If you wandered around this village, you'd get an awful lot of high hues, but not a lot of sort of pestering.
Yeah. Well, do you remember on our final visit of the main TV show, we had a fantastic barbecue and so on, and straw bales everywhere, and a good cider bar, etc., out on the field at the back there. So that was a nice farewell.
It was an absolutely wonderful evening, and being served burgers and wine by you guys was enormous fun. And there are a lot of sort of photographic evidence of that. It's the archive is full of that.
The early part of the evening, anyway.
Mostly the early part of the evening. Yes, it was a very jolly event. No, well, as I say, we have a very fond feeling about it all. But the managing of it is a grown-up business, and there's no question we're going to have to do a certain amount of that as time goes by.
Robin, thank you. I'm going to move on to the post office, as it was in the show, which is actually called Corner Cottage, is that right?
That's right, and it's literally 30 yards from where we are sitting. If you would like to hear the full programme, you can find it on the BBC Sounds app. During the TV series, the crew came to Bampton about twice a year. The day before filming was to begin, the set builders arrived, a crew of brilliant carpenters, electricians and artists whose job it was to take the village back in time. As we've seen, the village made little in the way of difficulty when it came to removing signs of the 20th century. Despite many efforts by that band of people whose time is spent looking for fault, there were very few incidents of wayward television aerials, modern building materials and so on. One did claim to have seen the yellow lines on the road, but since there's never been yellow lines in the square, that seems unlikely. The pillar box next to the post office was an opportunistic success.
The grim reality of a dog poo bin was transformed into a stone pillar so realistic that people were seen posting letters through the slot, only for them to drop amongst the mess below. Wires, electric trunking, modern guttering, any sign at all of the modern world was covered up, and the church close retreated 150 years in a single day. As the series progressed, more and more things had to be reproduced. The war memorial, plaques on the walls, the pub signs, all had to be exactly the same as before. And as we've already seen, the graveyard was particularly challenging. By the time Series 6 came to an end, the crew and cast of Downton had become familiar figures in Bampton. Many of the crew had made friends in the village over the years, and the stars could be sure of a warm but unobtrusive welcome from the villagers. It's true that such was the phenomenal success of Downton. The village filled up with paparazzi whenever the crew were here, and security had to be a little tighter than it was at the beginning. But it was always an open set, and the villagers and their friends, as well as the visitors who timed it well, were able to watch every step of the filming. When the end came, it was slightly sad. We got used to the sight of these stars walking the streets, and some of us felt as if we were part of this extraordinary phenomenon. The generosity with which the cast and crew threw a party for the village on their last night suggests that they felt at least slightly the same way. It was a great deal of fun, being served a glass of wine and a hamburger by Lord Grantham himself, with Mrs. Patmore bustling around in the background. In September 2019, the film of Downton was released. The crew had returned for a 2-day visit, but somehow it wasn't quite the same. The scale of the thing was huge by comparison. Many of the familiar people in the crew were not there, and the stars were hustled on set in limousines, keen to avoid the by now huge numbers of photographers. The weather was extremely unkind. The wind blew a gale, and the filming was done mainly inside the church and in the gardens of Churchgate House, out of sight of the crowds. We now know that at least one of the scenes filmed on that day had to be reshot later at Highclere Castle. We know, however, that Bampton's place in the firmament of film locations is firmly established, and we can expect the pleasure of visitors from every corner of the globe for many years to come.
The village has a fascinating history. It may not be in the Cotswolds, but it has a venerable past.
There's been a settlement here since the Bronze Age. It was once so remote that it was called Bampton in the Bush. There was a religious community here around 600 AD, run by a man called Bournewald. It was a collegiate setup, and his church was on the site where you see today's great stone building. He was canonized quite soon after his death, so Bampton has its very own medieval saint. John Blair, the Oxford historian who specialises in this area, says of Bampton Church, "Bampton Parish Church seems to have been one of those collegiate churches, lesser than cathedrals but greater than the ordinary run of churches, which were known by the 10th century as the Old Minsters. In the 13th century it still controlled a huge parish covering nearly half of Bampton Hundred and containing several daughter churches. It had a large rectory manor, and it was served by a team of 3 vicars, perhaps the direct successors of pre-conquest Minster priests, whose houses stood around the churchyard. In the late Anglo-Saxon period, this must have been the mother church of the whole low-lying region between the Thames, the Windrush, and the Cotswold foothills. Bampton was the administrative centre of the Bampton Hundred, which included many of the villages and towns around. I'm not sure anyone knows the origin of the word hundred in this context, but it certainly meant that Bampton was a place of great importance from a very early age, probably before the Norman conquest and possibly long before. A market in the 11th century was probably held on the land east of Church View, now several back gardens for the houses around, including mine, and the new triangular marketplace was laid out when a new market was granted by Henry III in the 12th century. In the 21st century, the church has come to the attention of millions of people worldwide as the parish church of Downton Abbey. The church and the buildings around it were used in the making of the television series. Churchgate House, standing, as its name suggests, at the gate of the churchyard, served as the Crawley household. Several of the local cottages became pubs, the post office, and villagers' homes, and the square was the Downton Village Green. The old grammar school, Downton's Cottage Hospital, starts its final phase of restoration next month. My amazing team of volunteers in the Bampton Community Archive, of which I'm chairman, have raised the enormous sum of around £250,000, thanks in no small part to the help of the Downton fans and the support of the star of the show, Hugh Bonneville. We expect to be finished by the time they arrive. In more violent times, one or possibly two castles were built here. The first by Matilda during the reign of Stephen in about 1142 as part of a chain of defences from Wallingford to Winchcombe, and later by the Earl of Pembroke in 1314. What's left of his castle is now incorporated into a private house, and the current owner has gone to wonderful lengths to restore the moat and all that's left of the medieval structure. Bampton had its brush with the Civil War. In April 1645, Oliver Cromwell beat a bunch of royalist troops in a battle at Bampton in the bush, and that night he is supposed to have slept in the house right next to where I now live, which was, of course, subsequently named Cromwell House. There is some doubt as to where the battle was fought. Cromwell's report states that the royalist troops were holed up in what he called a pretty strong house, which could, of course, have been the castle. However, there's no mention in his report of the subsequent destruction of the house, which is what you'd have expected if it had been a substantial fortification. In 1649, soldiers belonging to the radical group known as the Levellers mutinied in Salisbury, about 56 miles south of here. They marched north towards Burford, just a few miles up the road, where they intended to meet up with like-minded friends. Blocked from crossing the River Thames at Newbridge, which had been their intention, they crossed instead at Radcott, just a couple of miles from here, and on May the 15th, 1649, they marched through the streets of Bampton and crossed the plain to Burford. They were shortly followed by Fairfax, a parliamentarian general, and on the following day they were surprised and captured in Burford. Their leaders were executed outside Burford Church, while the rest of them were made to watch from the roof. This was the death knell of the Leveller movement, which subsequently petered out.
It has been a real treat for us to have the opportunity to revisit all the Downton-related Cotswold Explorer films. It takes me straight back to when I first heard Downton was coming. I telephoned the Yorkshire tourist people to ask their advice as to what to expect. They said, bear in mind, Last of the Summer Wine was filmed 40 years ago in 1973, and we still have visitors from all over the world. And as for the Harriet veterinary stories, they started in 1978 and we still call ourselves Harriet Country. I won't even bother to tell you about my research visit to Punta Secca on the south coast of Sicily, where Inspector Montalbano lived and swam in the bay every morning. His first swim was in 1999. I have a feeling our Downton story is very far from over. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. press the notification bell and have a glance at our new subscription channel, which we are thrilled to be able to offer to you, full of Cotswold Explorer gems, both new and old, and entirely ad-free. It's all in the description. And we'll see you again very soon, somewhere else in the Cotswolds.